Alright, let's today go over what is compression. So, in literal, like not literal, but in like real life applications that don't revolve around like sound, when you compress things in like a physical form, you're taking basically a set volume of something and trying to make it like denser, and like it becomes harder, and you fill in like all holes. Like say it was like a substance that's very spongy, or like has like holes in it, or is bubbly. The more you compress it, the less bubbles there'd be. Like if you had a sponge and you compress the sponge, you would take out all the holes that are throughout the sponge would be filled in, because you'd compress the sponge so much there'd be no more holes in it. So that's one way to think of it. Not 100% sure where I was going with that, but basically what I'm going to show you here is compression. So there's something called dynamic range in sound, which will look like, sweet. This is dynamic range right here in front of your face. This is an audio clip. I'll play it. Anyways, you can see it's got lots of dynamic range in it. That's basically, you see this black stuff here. This is the sample. This is the audio data. So in here you can see there's like little peaks and such of these little samples. When I zoom in, there's like peaks. So these are basically units of volume in a waveform. And you can see as you zoom in closer and closer, you can see the waveforms all the way down to kind of the samples. And so as you zoom out, they get closer and closer together, and you can see how there's like giant peaks of it over here and such. Those are points of high volume in a piece. So actually, if you look at something like a drum loop, like this drum loop here, for example, you can see in this drum loop that you can see where like the hits are. For example, this is one snare and this is another snare, and then these are the kicks, and then these are the bass shots or whatever. You can see in there where those are through dynamic range, because they're considerably louder than the other parts of everything else for a period of time. That's what makes like impacts or snares or kicks, is having very loud volume and then coming down, decaying from the loud volume very fast, along with like pitch and stuff, but that's not what I'm talking about. So in this piece, it's got dynamic range because there's certain parts of it where like the bass might kick in, like the cello might kick in, and cause the volume to be louder because of like positive interference through both of the instruments being played at like the same time or at peaks of their volume based on notes. The note D usually has higher bass tones, more like the strongest bass tones out of every note in a scale when you play it, because that has to do with the frequency it emits being like a standing still wave. So there's no dynamic range in that wave because it moves so slowly compared to the rest of the waves. Can I show this? I should be able to. Yeah, that's what I want. That's a great instrument right there. The multi-band compressor. That's a great one. Can make all the bass sounds you need with that. So I'm having this problem where my MIDI's not working right now, which is weird. Basically, I'll turn this down to like a square or something, and then we'll put an oscilloscope on it. Hang on, how could I do this? I want to like show the oscilloscope movement here. I'm pretty sure it was a D chord, or D, not D chord, the D. Now my thing isn't working. My MIDI keyboard isn't working because I'm sure my computer thinks it's out of memory and stuff because I've been just working on a huge project from a second ago. Yeah, it doesn't want to work at all. So I'm gonna try to pitch this down to. There's a way I wanted to show this. You know what I can do? What I'll try doing actually is make a scale so I can show you what I mean. So anyways, you see this wave that's being made down here? This waveform. This waveform. It has dynamic range, as you can see, but that has something to do with what I'm doing in here. There we go. That's what the waveform looks like. So you can see though, in this waveform, there's points where there'll be like a maximum and a minimum of in the wave. Yeah, here we go. So you can see how there's like a peak and then it goes down towards the center line. Because on the bottom and the top is volume, but at the center line there's just nothing, it's 0. Or infinite decibels. So that peak that goes down is this is like sort of dynamic range in a small level. And then what compression basically does is you can use it to remove dynamic range or like accentuate dynamic range. More or less remove. So like if I do, I don't know if this is gonna work too well, honestly. This is exactly what I want right there. Was it though? This isn't working the way I wanted it to go. I don't know about this oscilloscope. Okay, so back to what I was talking about before. So basically there's dynamic range in this waveform, in this series of music, but when you look at actual like finished pieces, like for example, this bass sample, yeah, I guess that's a good one. Like these bass samples, when you zoom out, they're kind of like rectangles, right? The dynamic range in these bass samples, there was some to begin with, is like all gone. So they just have like the same level of volume through the whole time of being played because all their like dynamic range has been killed. So yeah, you can also see it very well underneath here, this thing. Right there. Or if I press E and Shift A, here we go. You can see here like all the samples are really loud and crazy and really peaky opposed to like what we just had here, which had like tons and tons of dynamic range in it. You can compare and contrast the differences there. Like this is just like all black and then this one has like lots of room in it. So what that's the point of that is like when you mix something like a electro or like electronic based song, it's gonna come out with like no dynamic range. So you can see here like these cello, I have a cello bounce and like contact bounces, and they're like quieter and they've got like dynamic range in them like this a bit, but I do believe I was compressing these, so I was kind of removing the dynamic range to make sure they were loud. This is dynamic range getting quieter and then louder. This is like a crescendo and then decrescendo. Yeah, so if I were to take this actual audio sample here, and then you can like hear that dynamic range, but if I actually put a compressor on this, we'll put an oscilloscope after this so you can see what's going on. yeah, you can see the data coming through. So I'm actually going to compress this. I'm going to compress it to like stupid lengths just so you can see what it does. That's my... See how like the dynamic range of the sample just got entirely eliminated there? Like if I came here and bounced this. I don't want to play this like ever though. These are the same things, but look at them in comparison. The dynamic range of this this orange one here compared to the purple, exact same audio. This one just got crushed. So this one sounds like horrible now though. But you can hear how it's like generally the same volume at all times versus this one, which is not. Well, this one's still being pressed. If that makes any sense. So compression is helpful. This is just to stupidly extreme lengths. You can use it to like increase volumes of things. More or less things that have like quieter volume in them. For example, like a kick or a snare. If you wanted to get rid of the dynamic range in them, because a lot of them have like... Let's take this snare here, for example, and just stick it in its own slot, actually. Down here. So this is what a snare looks like, right here. This thing. But that's a lot different from like a snare you would hear in like dubstep or something, because a dubstep snare looks like... Yes, let's find a good one. Ah, here we go. Looks like this, where you can see it looks like for the first part of the snare, the dynamic range was just completely crushed out of it, and the difference is this. So, if we were to take the snare, add reverb, and then compress it, and we bounce that now. Does not come out the way I wanted to at all. Okay, hang on. Let's try this. See how like the starting dynamic range of the snare was like kind of wrecked? Like taken away in a sense. Like we click on this. Let me look at this one. It's like a lot fatter at the start. And there's like ways to make it so it's like pretty much a square like the other snare we were looking at. But like this one here, which is just like a complete square at the start, which is really hard compression. And then it stops after like a certain period of time. more punchy and has like dubstep purposes. That's where like that's part of the genre really is that. So a way a compressor works, I guess I'll just get into that, is you have a threshold in here. It's a threshold knob, and that basically sets the lowest unit of volume in whatever's going on that it's going to like use as a reference point, as like the point where you don't want your volume going quieter than that. Or no, you don't want your volume going over that level of volume when you move your threshold. So it's usually like always negative, and it can go up to -6 decibels in Bitwig on their compressor. And then the ratio is how much per unit of volume are you going to compress once it goes over that threshold. So like people say that whenever they're doing compression tutorials, that's what they say. It doesn't make sense to anybody. That's not a good way of explaining it. Basically, if you look in this audio here, say like somewhere in here on this line there is a value that is like -30 decibels. Let's say right where my cursor is here. So you can see all this audio that's above my cursor is above that -30 decibels. So part of the dynamic range thing is I bring down these things that are above that 30 decibels, and I bring them down to the volume of everything else down here, without lowering the actual volume of the stuff that's already down here. And then you use your output after you've done that to increase the volume of everything. So now all these peaks in here are like kind of gone. So that's helpful for like basses or certain types of chords. I'll do that all the time. A compressor isn't, like, compression isn't complicated. You use your threshold and your ratio, and you turn up your volume, your output volume. And you can turn off or on your makeup volume, which basically just automatically changes the output for you, to stop it from like becoming too quiet after compression, because compression does make things quieter because it relies on like taking away. So yeah, and then your attack is basically like how long does it take before it kicks in, before your compressor like kicks in, basically. So if you turn the attack up like high, you get like these clicks kind of. So that basically means like the volume was really high, and then the compressor turned on like, I don't know, 30 milliseconds later or something. And that's when it started to actually lower the volume of the sample, which can give chords like a stab feeling to them. If I load this project, everything's gonna like ruin on me. Here's what I can do. It's not what I wanted. Where are my chords? Chords. Here they are. So let's paste my chords into here. So here's these chords. That sounded cool. I put compression on these. I used multi-band compression though, which is a totally different topic. And so like if I put this compressor on here, you can see the audio traveling through here. So if I turn my threshold down, my ratio up, I'm like removing all the dynamic range. And if I put my attack up, you can see there's a point where it's loud volume, which is its regular volume, and then it comes down to compressor volume. So like if you want to give yourself like some like stabby chords, that's a good way to do it. Also, your release knob basically is how long does it take before your compressor turns off, and it will just gradually like bring the original volume back once after it's done compressing whatever was over the threshold. So yeah, just play with the settings. I can turn my threshold down, my ratio up to like 3, my threshold down to somewhere between like -40 to -20, And then I like to mess with my attack and my release depending on what it is I'm doing. And then the output is just if it's too quiet or not, but I always make sure it's not going into like positive decibels because then it's getting too loud. Yeah, that's it.